And hello, everybody, and welcome back to ScarsTales, our podcast for and by fans of the rich and special history of Scarsdale, New York. I'm your host, Lori Rothman, and I'm pleased to be joined by Scarsdale Village historians Jordan Copeland and Leslie Chang. All three of us are trustees on the board of the Scarsdale Historical Society, which is our sponsor. So we're in episode 2 of ScarsTales. You know, our goal here is to preserve and disseminate our local history and engage you, our audience. We'd love your feedback via our website and social media. All you got to do is look up Scarsdale Historical Society. Now, in this episode, we wanted to explore the history of the Scarsdale School District. The Scarsdale Historical Society has produced a full-length documentary on the topic, and it is fascinating. So let's get to it, Leslie. Just share with us your view on how the district has evolved since its inception.
Yes, the development of our school system is a story that's been told many times and reviewed on whether it's in many books and many stories. And that's really the reason many of us are here is for the school district. And when I've done research on the schools, what fascinated me the most is what was happening in the early days. Because I wanted to hear about the schoolhouses and everything that is unexpected from what we see today in the schools. Because I know Scarsdale was originally a farming community. And I was aware of some of the earliest school records and how they exhibited we had such humble beginnings, which isn't really what we imagine. Again, when we think of the district today, there were very limited means. They were worrying about things like, do they have enough chairs? So just to give you a picture,
that's unreal.
Yeah. In 1845, there were only 35 students. So we're talking about a very small district. It grew a little bit by 1871 to 124. And so there was quite an evolution coming. And I know Jordan always speaks so well about kind of what happened with suburbanization.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Scarsdale didn't have 1,000 people in it until the 20th century. So you're looking at a town that is rural, not particularly wealthy at that time, farming, it's landlocked, it's fallen behind all of its neighbors in terms of wealth and population. And what happened in the 20th century, what changed all of this is advances in transportation made it so that way you could live and work in two separate places. There weren't really people commuting in the mid-1800s. So you had a bunch of urban professionals moving into Scarsdale, and what they were interested in for education was something different than what the existing Scarsdale residents were into. You're a farmer. You want something that's functional. You need to be able to read and write and get out there and get to work. You don't need a high school, any kind of basic education. These professionals had college aspirations, and what education was like in the 1800s, public education was not expected to get you all the way up through college. If you wanted that advanced education, you paid for it. You send your kid to boarding school, you send your kid to private school or something like that. So all these professionals move in and they have an opportunity to make Scarsdale in a more aspirational image and ability to pay more in taxes to make it better and invest in the infrastructure to make a better environment for the schools.
Can you imagine if we were still just a farming community? Maybe the taxes wouldn't be what they notoriously are, but we don't need to get into that.
Hard to imagine.
Can you talk more about this transition and maybe the explosion in population that, led the school district? Because it is interesting, right, that it was a rural community and then Scarsdale became so respected and admired and sought after for its public school education.
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling kind of a thing. If you get a toehold and you get known for good schools, then more people start coming in who care about education. And that alone, regardless of the quality of the schools, will raise the performance of the town that you're in. So, Scarsdale started doing some things with experimenting with more adventurous, progressive education. They had something called the Dalton Plan, which is this project-based learning, and then that morphed into the Scarsdale Plan. And the pendulum's always swinging in education back and forth. So, maybe some of the kids didn't get fundamentals when they were doing all project-based learning, and then it pushes back towards something else. But from an early era, I have an ad from the Scarsdale Chateau Apartments from 1940 that's already bragging about the first-rate schools in Scarsdale.
I just wanted to remind our viewers or listeners, if you do happen to be listening, you've got to go check the website to see these awesome ads and elements that we're going to be talking about. But if you are watching us, you do get to see them right away. And it's fascinating.
Yeah, the sort of it's a little bit elitist, but I would maybe say aspirational, I will say, because it does say, quote, surround him with the right playmates and yourself and your family with congenial neighbors. Start him on his career path right in the schools of Scarsdale, whose educational system holds first rank in New York State. You don't really need to go there. I know it's a real estate ad, so they're kind of doing their thing. But, the one thing that I think has led not just who came to Scarsdale, but what led to such achievement was something that's not really on the radar so much, which was the development of this nonpartisan system that if you don't live in Scarsdale, you don't know. When we have elections for the village board or the school board, there's no party affiliation attached to it. It's generally a system where you have a nonpartisan party goes out and nominates, tries to get the best people for the job, puts them forward, and they often run unopposed. And there's a tension there, right? Because it looks elitist and undemocratic, right? But on the other hand, then you have people who aren't tied up in national politics that really don't have any bearing on it, and they're able to make good long-term decisions without repercussions of electoral consequences for it.
Leslie, let's shift to the district's physical landscape. Obviously, today we have 5 elementary schools, the middle school, the high school. But what were the origins?
Yeah, if I give you a little picture of what the different schools were, I find it very interesting. Starting in 1792, there's record of a school burning down. There was originally one little schoolhouse somewhere by the Griffin House, which is kind of at the top. It's on Mamaroneck Road at the corner of Garden. And there was definitely some sort of little tiny building we see where they might have had town meetings, and it's recorded as being a schoolhouse. That burned down, and eventually they moved down the hill to what they called the Old Fox Meadow Schoolhouse, which amazingly we have an illustration of. It was on what we call Fenimore Road. I mean, yes, we call it Fenimore Road today. Back then it was Fisher. And that was about 25 by 25 feet. So if you can imagine how tiny that was, I mean, originally, yes, we have record that they were teaching 35 students. But if you think forward, a few years from there, by 1871, there were 124 students in one room.
In one room?
Yes, in one
God.
room.
And what's it like? Like, do they have lights? Do they have indoor plumbing? How do the kids get to school?
Yes, and there wasn't that much recorded about that one-room schoolhouse because it was so early, but we get a lot more information when we get to 1876 when they built a 2-room schoolhouse, and then we start to get more information about the details you're asking about because we have the records where they wrote down kind of what the budget was and what they were going to buy. So we start to see this building was now 30 by 50 feet, and it had 2 rooms. The first floor had a schoolroom, a vestibule, a cloakroom, and then they had a basement for the second room. They had oil lamps in the budget and privies outside, which I always find is the most shocking detail to drop on current day students of Scarsdale.
I'm also going to guess, the number of students they had, I'm going to guess everybody didn't come every day, like now.
Oh, yes.
If you had other things to do, you just missed school.
You sure did. You were either possibly working on your parents' farm, you had bad weather, and you certainly had cold, like we said, cold weather, sicknesses, and what they would call irregular attendance. I have a stat here. In 1871, when they took attendance in one of the school books, it says out of the 124 students enrolled, the average was 19.
Leslie, to know more about that Victorian schoolhouse and what came next, what happened to it and why?
So as you can imagine, the population was getting larger and larger. And with time, it started to get overcrowded. And when it's overcrowded, that actually meant it was becoming what they called unsanitary. They use the word unsanitary in the newspaper many times, apparently just with no ventilation. The basement was damp. It was just becoming actually frightful was a word that was used in some of the newspaper articles. So the town decided they needed to budget for a new school, and they built the new school down where we have Village Hall today. It was a brick building. And it always reminds me of the Three Pigs, that they went from kind of the wood house, and then finally they came up with a brick house. And they were concerned about fire codes by then and ventilation. And that's when they built that school, was around 1906. And so it was still quite some time before they built our modern day schools. It took until 1916 that they finally built our first current day school, which is Green Acres, and the high school. And what kind of made those happen was actually related to fire. And even that brick building, as much as they thought about fire, they might not have been as strict about fire codes as we would be today. And there actually had been a fire in a portable school they had built because they were overcrowding. And thankfully, the children were away at lunch when a fire happened, and no one was hurt. But it definitely prodded them to build something more permanent with more thoughts on current day technology as far as safety and fire. And so first we had Green Acres and the high school, and then came Edgewood a few years after that. And then Fox Meadow came in 1928. And then it was quite some time before we had the schools a little bit farther over in town, where we have Heathcote. And then maybe Jordan can talk a little bit about the Quaker Ridge side of town.
Yeah, I mean, what we know now as the Scarsdale School District is actually the combination of two school districts, so 1 and 2. So Leslie's talking about along Post Road, where most people live, but there was another community, mostly of Quakers over in Quaker Ridge, that started in the early 1700s. And they started off by teaching their children in wooden meeting houses around the corner of Weaver Street and what's now Griffin Avenue. So that school served kids irrespective of where they lived. I mean, you had to be within walking distance, but you're coming from New Rochelle, you're coming from Mamaroneck, you could come from Harrison, and all the Quaker kids are being taught in that one little schoolhouse. That kind of morphed into a school in the corner where the farm stand is, on Quaker Ridge Road, and then they created a little school, which is now the Caddy Shack on Quaker Ridge Golf Club.
No
And
kidding.
that was just a couple rooms, and they used that one until the 50s when Quaker Ridge School was built. So one of the interesting things, and one of the questions that we get a lot, is people want to know, what about the Mamaroneck Strip? That's a part of Mamaroneck where the kids can go to Scarsdale schools. Well, that dates back to this era. Those people, the people who lived there, have been repeatedly grandfathered in for generations because they could go to that original schoolhouse in Quaker Ridge. And as time goes on, they just sort of, it became I don't know if it's an entitlement or an expectation, but now if you live in that part, you have the right to move on over to Scarsdale. You can really choose which one you want to and go to school there. So it's pretty cool.
Wow. How times have changed. All right. So, Leslie, you're being very modest about these school records that you have gotten a hold of. There's a story behind that adventure, too. Both of you guys were involved in that.
I
correct?
mentioned there's books written about the Scarsdale School District, and of course I've read many of them. And one of our most prolific writers was Amelie Rothschild, and in her book she kept mentioning the school record book, the school record books, the tiny blue book says this and that in the budget. And I said, what is this book she keeps talking about? Because of course Jordan and I are aware of all the different records that the village has between the library and the Historical Society. So I was asking all around. I finally reached out to the superintendent's office. And I reached out to Honore Adams, who's the administrative assistant to Drew Patrick. And I said, have you ever heard of these old school records? Well, amazingly, she got back to me within a couple days saying, we found them. They were in a box in some sort of offsite storage, which sounds like a magical place to me, wherever this Scarsdale Historical Schools information is. Hopefully someday we'll find out more about what's in there. But she came back with a box, and they invited me to come to the Board of Ed office and had me put on some gloves, and I got my hands on school record books from the 1800s.
Amazing.
Good. I mean, this is just a testament to the research and the work that you both do. And if you watch on Instagram and social media, I think you guys are kind of sprayed everywhere, correct? Just the reels, it's 30 seconds on 45 seconds, what have you, on this incredible digging and the stories and the information and the context that you've uncovered. So I really want to encourage everybody to check those out. But again, we're trying this podcast, Scarsdale, to sort of delve a little bit deeper. And we do have this wonderful documentary, if I do say so myself. It really explores so many different aspects of the history of Scarsdale School District. And one of the things I personally found most interesting is the dress code for girls. And there's a point to be made that finally at a certain time, the girls were allowed to wear trousers. I mean, that was really eye-opening. So would you say, Jordan, that Scarsdale was ahead of its time, along with the times, or behind the time in terms of education and the trends there?
I mean, I suspect it was slightly ahead of the times. I don't know whether it was ahead of the times in terms of modesty or anything like that. It's funny, you mentioned that sort of dress code thing. And to me, that's the sort of thing that makes us look at our own time and wonder what people in 100 years are going to look back on and be like, really? Like that sort of thing. Because I'm sure that there's things that we all take for granted right now that are just in 100 years people are gonna think that's absurd. So I mean, I think in general the school system in Scarsdale was more adventurous, but you do always have a tension between parents who want more sort of rigor and parents who want more exploration. And that tension has existed all throughout. And you have various accommodations made over the years to, okay, we've got all these kids who are working well in this environment. Let's set up some sort of alternative for them or something like that, where these kids that the regular school doesn't work for can thrive in this different system.
I think it's just fascinating. And I really want to encourage everybody to go check out the documentary. And of course, if you have any feedback for us or story ideas, we'd love to hear from you. ScarsdaleHistoricalSociety.com or on social media. Guys, always a pleasure to chat with you. So much enthusiasm. It's just been a delight and a joy for me to get to know you guys and collaborate with you. We hope to do many more ScarsTales podcasts. You can find it on our website and social media, as we said. So again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this latest episode of ScarsTales. See you next time.